Hello and welcome to the Vaults of Terra. My name is Ed and today we're going to be continuing our videos on the Imperial Guard by having a look at the Guardsman himself. Now, we've discussed previously the ranks in the Imperial Guard and a little bit of their organisation, but we haven't really talked about the Guardsmen themselves. Now, what I mean by the term Guardsman is the standard trooper, the lowest rank of Imperial Guardsmen, although technically anyone in the Imperial Guard is a Guardsman. Now, there are untold billions and billions of guardsmen in the service of the Imperium, and most do not rise above this rank, being thrust into the fires of battle and being killed usually in the opening salvos of a war. So I thought it would just be worth going through and talking about what a guardsman is, because it's not necessarily just a standard soldier with a lasgun. Now, the recruitment or conscription of a guardsman and their training is based entirely on the customs and traditions of their homeworld. As a result, some guardsman levies may be highly trained and ready for combat the moment they step onto their troopships, and some may be barely educated savages from some feral world who just the day before were killing one another with clubs. Now, the recruitment of an Imperial Guard regiment happens all at once. It isn't a long drawn-out process, and as I've mentioned before, they don't get reinforced in the field. So they'll usually take place all at once, and sometimes a celebration will be held to send off the Guardsmen into their likely death, or it will be part of the planetary tithe. Now, a tithe for a planet in the Imperium is where they give resources or men to the Imperium at large in order for it to sustain itself. Now, Imperial Guard regiments will usually cover a planet's tithe for an entire year, although that isn't always the case. Now, when a recruit finally gets onto a troopship and is transported across the Imperium to a conflict zone, they will be trained in how to use the equipment that they have been given and will be drilled in how to take orders from their new officers, many of whom will have been recruited at the same time as the Guardsmen themselves, but will have the distinction of being a higher rank due to their former class on their homeworld. Now, moving on from their recruitment, the role of a Guardsman in the Imperial Guard is incredibly varied. Now, they can be anything from vehicle drivers to scouts, and can fulfill any role in between, from snipers to medics to multiple different roles. Although not every guardsman will be trained in every single role, they will usually have some sort of specialty in a conflict. Now, their organisation is laid out in the Tactica Imperium, which is the seminal work for tactics for the Imperials. Now, this is a huge work. It's not like The Art of War, which is one book. It's multiple volumes across thousands of years, and so it's not contained in one place. And in fact, many different variations of the Tactica Imperium exist. However, there is a condensed version, which is used by the generals and commanders of the Guards forces in order to arrange their regiments, and this usually means it's divided up in several ways. The first way it's divided up is into squads. Now, squads can range from 5 to 20 men, although it's different for every regiment, and they will usually be commanded by a sergeant, although they could be commanded by an officer where needs be, and they are how a soldier interacts with his fellows and who they will fight with on the battlefield. Now, multiple squads are arranged into platoons. Now, there's no set number of squads that are in a platoon, although again it can range anywhere from 5 to 50. And now multiple platoons are then put together to make a regiment, which will be commanded by a colonel and sometimes a general, depending on the state of the regiment. Now, as I've mentioned, the size and strength of each will vary, and when I come to do the regiment videos, I will discuss exactly how many men there are in a squad, a platoon, and roughly a regiment itself. Now, what I wanted to move on to now is talking about the variations of Guardsmen. As I've mentioned, they can fulfill multiple different roles, so I thought I would go through several of those roles now. Now, the most common role is that of the weapon specialist. Now, many Guardsmen will be given a variety of specialised weapons beyond their standard issue lasgun, which can range from plasma guns to heavy bolters, melter guns, and even flamers, which are ubiquitous with some Guard regiments. Now, these weapon specialists will typically operate out of heavy weapon squads, but regularly they can be incorporated into a standard squad to augment their firepower in case they go into a situation where they require a little bit more of a specialist weapon. And also their weapon assignments will of course depend, so a regiment will probably not be issued with a flamethrower if they're going up against mass tanks, and conversely, if they're going up against mass infantry, they won't be given a melter gun. I'll discuss what type of weapons the Guard use in my armoury video, but just for an overview now, the weapon specialists are the ones who you will see wielding the weapons that are beyond the lasgun on the battlefield. Now I want to move on to talk about Hardened Veterans. Now, this term is given to a soldier who has survived where their regiment has been destroyed. Now, these survivors will usually be formed into one squad, who will then operate as an elite unit within a newer regiment from the same homeworld. They will usually be treated as elite soldiers and will sometimes join other regiments which are composed of hardened veterans themselves, so you have an incredibly elite regiment. However, more common is that the squad is assigned to a newer regiment, so the hope is that their experience with life on the front will help them survive longer on the battlefield. Now, another role that an Imperial Guardsman may have is that of a Vox operator. Now, the Vox systems are what they call radios in the 41st millennium, and Vox operators are soldiers who are given long-range Vox casters, very large pieces of Vox equipment, who will be used to relay orders around the battlefield. Now, sometimes they may be in squads, but usually they will be included in command squads, and their long-range Vox unit will be used to issue orders to smaller units, which will be carried by the leaders of the squads out in the field. Now, another variation is that of the medic. They're usually specially trained guardsmen who have medical skills either previously or have been trained to have these medical skills whilst in the guard, and they'll usually be assigned to leadership squads to help keep the platoon commanders intact. However, they will go out to the squads in battle and help keep the wounded alive for as long as possible, and so hopefully they can be healed and be sent back to their squads to go back to the battle. It's also good to note that medics in the Imperial Guard are also fully trained in combat, so they can fight alongside their colleagues when and if they are needed to in the heat of battle. Now, a standard bearer is also a guardsman, and they will usually be part of a command squad, and they have been given the honour through previous actions to actually hold the banner of the regiment and declare to the rest of the foes of the Imperium who they are fighting against and show the honour of their regiment. Now, of course, it's a little bit of a double-edged sword, because being a standard bearer you are instantly the target for virtually all the incoming fire from the enemy, because usually where you are is where the commander is. So although being a standard bearer is a great honour, it's also usually a role that's not held for a very long period of time. Another variation of guardsman that I want to talk about is something called a Stormtrooper. Now, a Stormtrooper is a little bit different from your standard guardsman, as they are elite guard units formed by guardsmen who have been trained in the Scholar Progenium. Now, the Scholar Progenium is an orphans training program given to children of the officers of the Imperial Guard and children of members of the Adeptus Terra who have been killed either in conflict or who have been lost to the innumerable tides of the galaxy. And so they are then sent to the Scholar Progenium and trained specifically in conflict and upholding the ideals of the Imperium. Now, because they are trained from a very young age, much like a Space Marine, they are very competent soldiers. They are given the best equipment and armour because they have the best training, and they will be used as elite strike forces on the battlefield, able to go where a commander needs and suppress the enemy with massed shots from their hell guns, and being able to absorb a lot more damage than a standard guardsman, although nothing like the damage that can be taken by a Space Marine. In fact, Stormtroopers are so well respected that they're actually requisitioned by the Imperial Inquisition, who utilise Stormtroopers in conflicts with the enemies of the Imperium outside the battlefields where a Stormtrooper usually will be. They are known as being quite taciturn and very combat oriented, as of course they have spent their entire lives training for conflict and are seen as not having a great sense of humour. In fact, a lot of the other Imperial Guardsmen do tend to almost look down on them as sort of elitist, stuck-up soldiers, even though they are some of the most highly trained members of a regiment and will actually not usually be from the same world as the guardsmen that they're fighting with, even though they will usually fight with them for long periods of time. Moving away from the Stormtroopers, I also want to talk about something called Rough Riders. Now, Rough Riders is a term given to any Imperial Guard regiment, unit, squad who actually ride animals into battle, like the cavalry we saw a couple of centuries ago on Earth. Now, they can ride anything from horses to more exotic Xenos beasts that they've taken from their homeworld, and these creatures will be used as a sort of shock and awe tactic for some enemies, and will also be used for hit and run raids against the flanks of their enemies, in order to distract them and enable the massed infantry themselves to push forward with that fear of being too shot to death by the flanking enemy. Now, another variation on the standard guardsman is that of the conscripts. Now, I mentioned them before. Now, proper conscripts are quite common in the Imperial Guard, and they are those who did not sign up for Imperial Guard service. They were taken by force. Now, they'll either be the poor from some worlds, who have not had enough soldiers apply to meet their tithe, or they could be taken from prisons and given a pardon in return for service, or many other different ways of being acquired. Now they are known by standard guardsmen as white shields, as they tend to be rushed into service, have very little training, not really know how to use their basic equipment, and will usually be killed in the first wave because they will be sent ahead of even the standard Imperial Guardsmen to essentially absorb the fire and test the strength of the enemy. Now this is not to say that all Imperial Guard regiments are free of conscripts. In fact, there will be a lot of conscripts mixed in with standard Imperial Guard, and they tend to adapt to life quite quickly. However, it can lead to a little bit of dissension in some regiments because of the nature of these conscripts, and that can lead to some disciplinary problems, although that is what the commissariat is for. Now finally, a variation I want to talk about is a penal conscript. Now this sounds very similar to a conscript. You imagine, well yes, if they're prisoners and they've been conscripted, surely these are penal conscripts. Well no, a penal conscript is someone who is being punished by being sent to a specific Imperial Guard regiment that deal with penal conscripts. Now these are the lowest of the low in terms of the Imperial Guard. They tend to be the scum, the rapists, the murderers. They also tend to be those who have severely disobeyed orders in the Imperial Guard, but are not considered to have done so severely enough to be punished with execution. These are formed into relatively expendable regiments who are then sent out to combat the enemies of the Imperium, usually with bombs strapped to their chest, and who will be sent into the thickest enemy fighting and then just blown up in order to make big holes in the enemy defences. Now, of course, there are some exceptions to this. Now, the last chancers are a squad of penal conscripts who actually do quite well in conflict, because obviously they want to survive, and so they quite efficiently deal with quite a number of threats without being killed off. Now, that's the end of the variations I wanted to talk about, but I did just want to finally mention the equipment of the Guardsmen. Now, we've all seen the standard Imperial Guardsmen in the books and in the promotional material from Games Workshop. Will usually be the Cadian regiment, in their standard armour looking very much like a soldier of the modern day. However, that's more of a stereotype of a guardsman than an actual guardsman. Their uniforms can range in a wide variety of colours, shapes, materials. They can be anything from gas mask wearing trench coaters to those in pith helmets and bright red pressed uniforms. There are a vast variety of Imperial Guard uniforms, and so even when recognising a fellow guardsman on the battlefield may be difficult because everyone is in a different uniform. However, the one item that binds every Imperial Guardsman together is the lasgun. Every single Imperial Guardsman will be issued with a lasgun, even if you're a primitive savage who has only ever wielded a wooden club before. You will be given a lasgun, trained vaguely in how to use it and how to keep it clean and how to make sure it's still operating, and then be sent with it into the battlefield. In fact, if you read some of the materials from the Black Library, such as the Munitorum Manual, the lasgun itself is actually valued more highly than the life of the Guardsman. You can always get more Guardsmen, but it takes time to manufacture a new lasgun, and they'd rather not lose them on the front line. And so the lasgun itself has become the symbol of the Imperial Guard. It's massed fire being used to drive back the enemies of the Imperium as the soldiers sell their lives to keep the Imperium free, etc, etc. So that is the life of a guardsman, mainly filled with training in conflict. There's a vast variety of guardsmen in the Imperial Guard, but they all have two things in common: their lasgun and the fact that they are guardsmen in the Imperial Guard. So that's everything I wanted to mention this week in relation to Guardsmen. Now we will be continuing our videos next time with the White Scars, as they are one of the last first founding chapters who didn't really get a look in during our chapter videos. And so now we're going to start alternating between Imperial Guard videos and Space Marine chapter videos, and they will keep going for a while until we've finished off the Space Marine chapter videos. And we'll also be looking for what regiments you want to start seeing when we've finished off the general Imperial Guard stuff, so do not forget to vote below. Also, we have now finally created a forum for the Vaults of Terra. It's just a basic thing that we've put together in order for you guys to have discussions about the lore of Warhammer 40,000, and for us to have an environment where you can ask us questions, we can answer, and we can sort of have a bit more of a discussion going around than the current YouTube comment system will allow. Now, the forum is called the Vox Relay, although I've tried to search for it on Google and I've not found anything. So what we'll do is leave a link in the description box below. You can go there, you can sign up, you can do whatever you like. We don't expect it to be overflowing with people, but it would just be nice to get a little bit of feedback through that forum. And it's also where we can set up some new polls so you can more easily vote for the regiment or Space Marine chapter that you want to see coming next on the Vaults of Terra. So that's everything I wanted to discuss today. See you next time on the Vaults of Terra.